All right, welcome to Intro to Design. By the end of this lesson, I hope you'll be able to list qualities of a well-designed website. So let's talk about why this matters. So design is a lot more than what something looks like. What something looks like is like how it's decorated. Design is fundamentally about how something works. And so in the same way that we design functions and we design the software part of the application, we also design its user interface. But that's not like, it's not art. It's not communicating a message. It's not supposed to be something that you do with a beret and a paintbrush or something like that. It's trying to figure out, how does this solve a problem for somebody? How can we make the actions that they need to do and the information they need to find easy to get to? And just like we learn JavaScript and Ruby and whatever else, we also learn visual language. And so just like JavaScript and Ruby and all that other kind of stuff, there's grammar, there's syntax, there's rules. And we're generally not brought up with like a good vocabulary around that stuff. So hopefully today we can start chipping away at that, because this isn't something that, it's as creative as programming, and it's also as structured as programming. And since really what we're doing is we're making products, I think it makes sense to talk about all of this stuff as kind of one thing, because I think it is. So there's three qualities of visual design that I want to talk a little bit about today. Talk about typography, color, and layout. And so here's how I want to do this. I want you to find something that you've designed in this module. So like, it's probably not going to look very good. That's completely fine. That's the entire point of this exercise, is I want to start making like a delta between, hang on. I want you to check out this site. It's lincorewatches.com. This just won an award for design, which is why we're looking at it. And it is extremely well designed. I want you to pull up the thing that you made, this module, and I want you to compare it to this award-winning, well-designed site. And specifically these three things. I want you to compare and contrast your typography, your color, and your layout with how they did that. Just see if you can spot differences between those and make as big a list as you can. So I want to spend 6 minutes on this, and then let's chat a little bit. 6 minutes on the clock. Writing down things that are the same, things that are different. Typography, color, layout. Go. lincorewatches.com. Hey, Ben. So we're going to lincorewatches.com, and you're comparing the design of this site to the design of something that you've made, specifically looking for typography, color, and layout. What did you do? What did they do? What's the same? What's different? Nice. If you don't know specific words like how to describe your type versus their type, be as descriptive as you can, regular human language. Another 2.5 minutes. Okay, let's chat a little bit. Let's start with typography. What did you notice about the typography on this site?
I think they've got like a couple of different like fonts that they use.
Okay.
I want to say not even just like the font sizes, like the font type,
Mm-hmm.
just enough to make it different and kind of draw your eye.
Interesting observation. So let's get some vocabulary first. When we're talking about type, there's a couple words that come in handy. Typeface would be something like Arial. Font would be Arial 700 weight at 16 pixels. So this is the family. A font is a specific implementation of that. Because like when you make a font bigger or smaller, it's not literally like zoomed in and zoomed out. It's designed for very specific looks at different sizes. Some of them have like a write at home at 16 pixels, that's where they're most legible, and then as you make them bigger, they sort of feel off. Works the same way in the other direction. So for example, this one right here, I promise you that was designed to be this small and still be legible. Because there's other typefaces. You do the same thing with this, but you can't tell what the letters are. And then weight. Weight refers to how thick the lines are. So this is a very heavyweight font. That's a very lightweight font. But the typeface refers to the family of fonts, or the font family. Cool. So let's stick with fonts a little bit more. So you mentioned like there might be a couple different typefaces happening here. I actually think this is probably all the same one. Maybe.
If you scroll down,
Yeah.
there's like some other ones, like you go to link subscribe.
There we go. It definitely is. Anybody tell me why we know that these two are different typefaces? Not just different weights and sizes? One is serif and one's sans serif. That's like dead giveaway. So Toby, what is a serif?
It's like the little feet, or like the little like kind of ornamental things that kind of lead your eye.
Yep. All these little feet, these are called serifs. And Toby nails their purpose also. They're not just decorations on the letters. It leads your eye along this bottom line. You can especially see it in this word informed, how it's almost a straight line across this. In long form text, that's a lot easier for your eye to sort of track that almost invisible line. It's a guideline. It helps you not lose your place. So if you have multiple lines, you don't accidentally jump between them. And you can keep your like vertical place a lot easier. Let's talk briefly though about how do these maybe feel a little bit different? Because type, and this is a fascinating thing about type, this is the first thing that just blew my fucking mind when I started learning about this stuff, is first of all, how on earth does something like that carry meaning? Or how come you know what that means? It's just fucking scribbles. Or if I write, how come I can make scratches on something and now you've got a picture of an airplane in your head? That's wild, for one. Furthermore, the fact that you can recognize that and that as the same thing. Also just scratches. Or, how about this? What if I did something kind of like that? Do like bubble letters? That versus these feel different, don't they?
Yeah.
This feels like fancy formal. This feels like kind of lighthearted. I'm sorry, so not only can I make a scratch on something and you understand its meaning, it could even like conjure a picture up in your head, but it can have a mood? That's crazy. That's like an entry into the endless depths of typography. I remember when they made that documentary about Helvetica, my wife was watching. I was like, a documentary about a font? Flash forward to 2019. I have like 15 books on typography. There's just so much fascinating shit about this. But a typeface has a personality to it. And the reason it has the personality is type is a culture sponge. How something gets used like starts informing like how you feel about it. Most famous example of this, Comic Sans. So Comic Sans looks ridiculous. Looks like you don't know what you're fucking doing. Anybody know why it kind of has that connotation?
I don't know why it has that connotation, but it was actually made to be for like people with dyslexia.
Mm-hmm.
It like really helps.
Oh, absolutely.
But wasn't it also used in comics?
Well, like that's what it was designed for. It happens to be really good for dyslexia because the characters are irregular. It's just a mimic. It's not even just like mimic the look of comic books. It's to mimic the look of a particular guy's script. And so it has a very like kind of natural hand-drawn feel to it. It's also a very well-designed typeface. Like just mechanically, it's pretty well done professionally. So how come somebody sends you an email in Comic Sans, you go, oh no.
It's because culturally you're saying, I watched your previous video.
Oh.
Yeah, they're saying like, so everyone that was using it, like church newsletters and like,
yes.
all these people were using it so much that it just became this like joke thing.
Mm-hmm. So it was one of maybe 8 typefaces that were included with Microsoft Word 95 or something like that. And that was like one of the first times that average users got to pick a typeface for something. Usually it's like whatever your computer lets you do. And so that was the only one that was like kind of silly. And so it got done to fucking death. And now we think that of like anything that even kind of looks like that as ridiculous.
So why don't we kind of get the same feel with Times New Roman? Because I feel like
Sure.
that's like the standard. So if in the Comic Sans case it's used to death, why is Times New Roman not used to death?
Cool.
In this case.
So I have a hunch that a lot of you, when you were comparing the type on this site with the type of something that you made, like this looks designed or has a personality. When I see a browser default like Times New Roman used in a design, it looks like, let's default. So in a lot of ways, it kind of is done to death. And also, not a bad typeface. That was like expertly designed. It's one of the best designed typefaces of all time, which is why it was a default, which is why when you see like website that uses Times New Roman, see if browser default CSS website. You see something that looks like this. Oops. There we go. You see something like this, and it doesn't look designed. It looks default. It looks basic. It's because it is. You don't put any style sheet on something, that's what you see. And so you make that association with that. Another fascinating thing about Times New Roman, there was a Times Roman before that was designed for, anybody know? You could probably guess. Mm-mm. It's the New York Times. And so Times Roman was commissioned by the New York Times as like the typeface for the New York Times, and it like it was so well done and so classic that When they started doing it for screens, screens have different needs than print. And so in particular, I believe they made it a little bit taller on the whole and put the characters a little bit closer together. So it's tighter kerning. But what kind of, let's go back to this site. What kind of vibe are we getting off of the typography on this site?
High end.
High end. It feels fancy. It feels very Euro.
It's a Russian site. It's very modern.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hyper modern. One of the things that's doing that is, here's another dead giveaway on fonts or typefaces. Take a look at the O's. If it's a perfect circle, we call that a geometric typeface. Geometric stuff like always feels hyper modern. If you compare that to like script fonts or these like serif fonts, which feel very traditional and elegant and whatever, that contrasts really well with this. So we're saying that we are elegant and fancy and also hyper modern. That's kind of the mood of those typefaces. Another like dead giveaway for geometry is like, look at that. You've seen like lowercase L's that have a lot more personality than this. And this is very much saying like, fuck personality. Like, we're gonna let the letter stand alone because I think the letter itself is like that powerful, that beautiful. That's kind of what that's saying. And then you look at little things like this. Look at that really nice way they made the C and the O go together. So that's not part of that typeface, I promise you. That's like,
That's the logo.
that's the logo. But it's little touches like that that make it feel like everything kind of belongs together. Okay, so we're getting high end, we're getting formal, we're getting all those kinds of moods out of these with just the typography. If you contrast that with the stuff that you probably did, like what things did you notice about your typography? And like you can be critical without like being critical of yourself because you've been doing this for a whopping 2 weeks.
Well, I didn't change my font, so it felt default.
Yes. What else?
Boring. That's
Boring.
any personality.
No personality.
No feeling.
By just changing the typeface you're using, like that's the reason I wanted to do this one first. You can do so much to just bring a lot of life and meaning and communicate so much message. We're making products, right? Does this seem like we want to communicate elegance, modernity, all that kind of stuff? Yeah. Just that your typeface choice makes a big impact on that.
So where do you start?
Great question. So if we go to Google Fonts, first thing we need to ask ourselves is like, what feeling should this have? Should this feel fun? Should this feel elegant? Should this feel trustworthy? Should this feel silly? Young Damon is doing the like Magic the Gathering thing right now. Okay, what kind of typography does Magic the Gathering use on their own shit? We can like probably pinch from that a little bit. What vibe does that game have? All of those things are like questions you want to answer first. And then I learned this trick very recently, and it works so well. I fucking love it. So we have 960 typefaces on here. If you go to font properties and number of styles, and just bring this up kind of far, really well-designed typefaces tend to have a lot of different fonts in them. And so if we bring that to like 11 plus, 12 plus, we've narrowed 960 down to 45. And so we go, okay, next thing we probably want to ask is serif, sans serif, display. This would be like very sparingly used in the app, usually for like a logo or something like that. Handwriting or monospace. Monospace is like what we use in our text editors. Because all the characters take up the exact same amount of space, so like the columns line up. So we go, all right, Why don't I start with a sans serif? All right, I'm down to 35. And then with those, the kinds of choices we're making are we're looking for personality, something that matches what our goal is. Also, you think about how it gets used. So you can see even here how like wide and spread apart this feels versus like how narrow that feels. Stuff that is going to be used in like headings, that kind of stuff, usually a little bit more narrow. Stuff that's used in bodies, a little bit wider. You think about the size that it's going to be used at also, which I think they let you even play with that a little bit on here. There you go. So as we make these smaller, all right, that's 8 pixels. Like standing right next to the screen, there's definitely a difference in readability on these. Montserrat, I can still read that at 8 pixels pretty well. Source Sans Pro, if I didn't know what it said already, probably not. So like the art of choosing typefaces, we're not going to master in this lesson. These are some of the considerations you make when you're picking one. Cool. Other questions about how typography, how we use that as designers? Easiest thing you can do to make your site not look like shit is pick an appropriate typeface. Takes almost no effort. Neat. So we want a typeface that matches the feel that we're trying to have in the design. Let's talk about color. What did you notice about color on that site?
It's also very modern.
Yeah. What feels modern about it?
It's like
They had contrast as well as kind of like neutral colors.
very soft.
Very soft.
It's the kind of color that you can project anything onto.
I like that.
As a buyer,
How many?
but also expensive.
Yeah.
Because like minimalism is expensive.
Yes. So how many different like key colors are there on this site, you think? 4? How do you figure?
Yeah.
So like there's like the dark blue,
Mm-hmm.
the gray, and that like rose color.
So I'm going to actually call that 2. I'm going to say this like darker blue and this peachy kind of color. Everything else is either grayscale or some variant on those, like a softer, like darker version of those. And I'll bet if we looked at a color wheel, first of all, you see it echoed all over the site. You've got it there, you've got it there. You see it in these, so like it doesn't show up on the screen quite as well. That's a really soft version of that peach. It's a really soft version of that blue. Oh, there they are again. And it's even kind of reflected in their clothes a little bit.
It's in their skin color.
Yes.
Did they change the photos to match the color, or the color to match their?
100%. They absolutely did. You can even see that. Okay, look at her skin tone here. You just within those, like. I'll bet that's not what she actually looks like. And then yeah, it's like even more matched to that color there.
Like her bronzer on her cheeks.
Yes.
Top, it's exactly like the color.
Yes.
It matches their-
Exactly. And then there's that blue. It's a lighter version of that blue. Okay, cool. So, what kind of insights do you think we get from this? This is like baller fucking use of color, by the way. These are really done.
Interesting that they use just variants of the same color.
Yes. When you're picking out colors for a site, I think the biggest mistake new designers make is too many fucking colors. Using more than one is difficult. Using 2 in the right hands, okay. Using more than that is almost always a recipe for disaster. So let's take a look at some other
So
sites.
you think 2 colors and then variants of that should be in there?
Oh, yeah. Let's take a look at some other sites. Let's look at Hulu. They just did a redesign kind of recently. Yeah. Horror, news, drama. Yeah, these kind of have moods to them. There's a lot of colors. But also, kind of figures they do that. They have so many shows they have to highlight. All right, let's take a look at Yahoo. Just did a redesign kind of recently. Yes, it does. Yes, they have. Hey, weird. One color. They still managed to make their site too fucking busy with one color. Just a feat.
So is that one color the blue?
Yeah, this right here. So we call this like the logo, or I would not have done it this way. I don't know why on earth that would be different shade than this or this. It really should be the same.
But also not a complementary shade.
No, it's stupid.
But that is the shade that they're using in their writing, like the
Their
pop-ups
links.
too.
Right.
The link writing is the same as you said.
So usually like a logo color and like a button color. You think of those as like the middle, and you usually want 4 lighter shades and 4 darker shades from that. And you also want that with grayscale. Generally want 9 different grays that you can use, because, and we'll use this for hierarchy. Take a look at this. That. These are probably the same, but this ends up like looking like it has more precedence because of where it's placed. So we can do so much to create this like importance hierarchy based on how dark the color is. And that ends up being a much better thing. Like a lot of, when you're beginning design, you do way too much with sizes. You want important stuff really big, you want unimportant stuff really small. But you can get that exact same effect without fucking with the size quite as much by just using different values of your black. Cool, let's take a look at Netflix. Netflix has good design. Cool. Primary color, primary color, primary color. Any other colors on there? Not really. Now this green, check this out. So we actually saw this on the Yahoo page also. There is one other color. It's right there. I got it there also. These are called accents. An accent is something that's supposed to jump out and stand apart from whatever your main color is. And you usually want about 9 shades of that also. You use it very rarely. That's why it doesn't really count as a different primary color in your app, but it helps call attention to things really easily. So yeah, Netflix wants your eye to go there. It's an accent, jumps out from your main color. Also, this upper left placement, we do eye tracking scans. That's where your eye goes first. The first thing you see is free 30 days. And if you didn't catch that, we also have it front and center, up top, free for 30 days. These are the messages they want you to see first. That's why this is design, not art.
What's their background thing supposed to look like?
Ooh, very nice. So, any guesses? What's this like background wash? How there's kind of like some colors in there, and
I think it used to be a picture of 2 people watching TV together. It looks like it's just a blurred out version of that.
yeah, it probably is.
I was thinking it's like the thing that you, if you do sign in,
Mhm.
is at the top of when you sign into Netflix, there's like always the one show they want you to see.
Mm-hmm.
And this You could see that if only you paid enough, and then like you could get behind this wall.
Yes. I think that's exactly what they're hinting at. Also, it happens to create more motion in this. So a thing that I typically notice in student work versus like, big money design work is that student work sometimes just kind of flat. Nyeh. It's just there. It's the same as that like typeface. Feels very default. Something like this, without distracting from the message at all, creates this kind of motion and energy around this. It even sort of like, see how it sort of even does a circle here? And so you sort of read it like that? That's fucking cool. And yeah, and it sort of looks like a TV is on, but blurred out, like that. You could be seeing this featured content if. Well done. So, when you're doing color, God, still trying to start that. It's a thing called color theory. Color theory, an aspect of color theory is that certain colors have certain moods or evoke certain moods, or just otherwise have feels to them. So if I do this red, for example, what does that make you feel? So we do anger, what else? Irritation. What else? Traditionally, they say urgency.
But that red is not an urgent red. That's like a flatter, darker red. Like a brighter red would be more urgent.
Oh, that's the projector.
Oh.
It's like a maximum saturation red on my screen. Okay, so we've got.
For us, that's like the color of blood. That's like,
Right.
but that's the color of my favorite person.
Okay, that's what it is on my screen.
That's a very different color.
Yes. All right, so we've got that with red. What about? That's not the worst representation of blue, but also probably a little bit more intense. Boredom. Mellow, I like that. Calm, mellow, boring. What else?
I know some people say blue reminds them of like either like the ocean or being sad or something.
Okay, ocean, sad. In traditional color theory, we also usually go trustworthy. We'll talk about that in a sec. That's kind of interesting. What about green? What do we think about? Earthy. Earth, spring, renewal. What else? Money. That's like culturally specific, but so is all this. Any thoughts on yellow? So happy, vibrant. What was that? Energy. Happy, vibrant, energy.
If I stared at it too long, I could see irritation in that too.
Absolutely. Also, in traditional color theory, impulse. Kind of goes along with all that. All right. So unsurprisingly, most of these words you came up with are the same ones that everybody comes up with when they're talking about this. And it's because we so readily identify these emotions with these colors. So as you're picking colors for something, it makes sense to put some thought into these. Now, that doesn't happen in a vacuum. For example, this blue, go-to for banks. Any like financial institution, there's a joke, it's like nobody ever got fired for picking blue as the primary color. So every fucking bank usually has some variation on a blue logo, except
Wells Fargo.
Wells Fargo goes with yellow and red. Like, why? Why do you think that they did that when everybody else is going blue?
They want to stand out.
Want to stand out. So that's the other thing you have to keep in mind. If everybody is doing this, if you do something else, that's how you stand out. Yeah.
With the color theory, I want to say, so these are stuff that we associate with it, but if you have it in like an international website, that can mean different things in different countries.
Yes, it can. That is just hard fucking design. And so you might try to come up with some things that are universal, like especially brand marks, logos, that kind of stuff. But like, oh, that's absolutely a thing. They go, actually that style of W is super offensive in these countries that we want to do business in. Like, so you imagine that's a very frustrating kind of design challenge to face. But it's just like programming. You have these weird constraints and you have these problems to solve. You got to figure something out. But it's also really common to have those key elements that you try to make work cross-culturally. And also, it's not just a matter of changing the language on a site, you also localize it. So you might choose different, especially imagery. It could entirely be the case, I mean, it's practically the case in America, that like you can see somebody really not liking that imagery. It might suggest certain things in certain cultures, might piss people off, might not communicate the thing that they want it to communicate. So, /EN. You go to a different locale, maybe they pick a different image. Maybe they pick different colors. Absolutely do that kind of thing.
It's the same in Russian, but if they did use the same font, and it doesn't look quite font.
Indeed. Cool. So that's a little bit about color. In one of the live coding videos I did a live palette creation. Palette, yeah, there we go, 1L. Palette. So palettes tend to, these are all examples of web palettes. The my favorite palettes, I'm trying to see if there's anybody has one, end up kind of looking like this. So I usually like about 9 grays. So this is, a lot of times your white isn't actually a white, it's like a pearl or an off-white or something. So that's at one end. And then your regular body text is usually whatever black, but also that could be off black a little bit. And then I want about 7 in between those. And then I want a primary color. I want an accent color. And then it's really helpful to have things like a confirmation and a warning color. So you're about to delete something. This is probably the color of that, like, are you sure you want to do that button? This one is like, might be something like the button to create a new user, something like that. That might be that one. This is the primary color of the site. This is the accent on that. That's an example of like what a palette would be.
Wait, So it was something like primary color, accent color, alert color, and then what was the other one?
Success color.
Oh, okay.
Or sounds like I've used palettes that have like a success, a warning, and a danger or alert or something. And then you use shades for each of those also. Oh, one more thing on color. So it doesn't exactly show up this way on the page, but these are the hypersaturated colors. So 3 parts of color that we care about: hue, saturation, and light. Hue is like what we'd call the color, like red or blue or yellow or whatever. That's this thing down here that I'm scrolling back and forth on. These are hues. And so I pick a blue, and then one of these axes is how saturated it is. So that's, come on, man. This is completely unsaturated. That's usually grayscale. And this is super saturated, which is Barney and Friends. And then in between these, we have regular kind of stuff, more pastel kind of stuff. And then in this other axis, we have dark and light. This is dark, this is light. So we'll say that that's the color, the intensity, and we can think of this as how much white or how much black. All the way light is white in everything. So that's all the way white, that's all the way black. And if we want to make something grayscale, we desaturate it.
So when you're picking your color palette,
Mhm.
say you have a purple from
Yep.
your bar, and your scale or like whatever you just showed of like
Mhm.
range of colors, it can be anything in either axis
Yes,
that's on that purple.
Correct.
axis or option.
yes.
Okay.
I picked a hue, now I'm picking what saturation and what lightness I want for it.
And then you stick with that purple. Don't scroll the bottom left and right unless you become a holding color.
Exactly. Now, like what gets tricky about this, while this takes quite a bit of skill, is that not all colors are the same. If you have the same lightness and saturation and you pick like a mathematically complementary hue, for it to look right, you usually have to tweak it a little bit, because some of this is like our eyes are more sensitive to some colors than others. Some of it is that the medium, like certain screens versus like print, treat yellow and blue and red like a little bit differently. And so there's usually manual tweaks that you have to do it right, and that's why like design is a skill that takes a while to get good at. But that's generally kind of the idea. Other color kinds of stuff to think about. Somebody pointed out that this kind of like neutral pastel kind of thing. So that's another thing that like I notice a lot in people who are starting with design, is you try to pick awesome colors and then use the fuck out of them, and it really doesn't work that way. What you want is like one badass awesome color, and then you want a lot of way lighter, more neutral kinds of things that make the cool thing that you picked stand out more. Because the thing that makes that jump out is its relationship with everything else. If you have too much awesome at the same time, nothing's awesome. But if I have that super desaturated color and then I maybe even have one that's even more desaturated than that around it, like all of a sudden this has so much depth to it now. But if I do this exact same thing with that really intense purple, now it's just illegible.
It's like making your background bright purple.
Yes, exactly. So you want to be real careful about how you're using the colors you've picked to kind of let the cool stuff be cool on top of it. Otherwise, it just robs focus. Cool. Last thing, let's talk about layout. Tell me some things you noticed about the layout of this page. Lots. Tons of white space. This is another thing that people just do wrong all the time when they're starting out. Don't give stuff enough breathing room. Look how much. Okay. All of this. Nothing. What does that do? Think about the conversation we just had about color. It makes this so important because it's just surrounded by white space. That makes your eye just jump to it. Look how much space there is here. Look how much space there is between these things. Space. And not an accident either, the same amount of space here as under it. This stuff isn't arbitrary. It's not like do it till it looks right. A lot of this stuff is like, okay, there's almost definitely a mathematical relationship between how much space there is here. That looks like it's about twice as much as this. This is some multiple of that, and this is some multiple of that. When things are evenly spaced, we sort of assume that they're equally important, or at least they all have this same relationship with each other. The extra weight on this and the lighter weight on this one gives us a hint of their relative importance, but also we're saying that these two things belong together more than this belongs with either of these two, because we space them this way. Name of the watch, some size, dimension kind of thing on it, and how much it costs. That sort of makes sense. These two have a tighter relationship than this does with either of them. And by this having less space than this, we're saying that this has a tighter relationship with this than it does with this. And it totally does. Oh man, so much space. Wonderful.
I noticed that the header and the footer both have links. Is that also, that's something you can see common with other websites?
Absolutely. Like on that note, I want to point this out. While you're learning design, this is not a creativity contest. And it's one of the things that's actually a little bit bullshit about design competitions is good design is something that like matches your user's expectation. Nobody wins a contest for like, it's super predictable, it's exactly what I was expecting it to be. But that's what good design is. And so while you're like trying to learn rules and patterns and all this kind of stuff, everybody else put links in their footers, you probably should too. And you could just rip off like great layouts that you like, note for note. Use their typography, use their spacing, use all that kind of shit. And what you'll notice is that really well-designed stuff differs wildly in some areas and really not in some others. And so it's a great way to build up that vocabulary. Like one of my favorite things to do is like while I'm watching TV or something, I have a sketchbook and I have a pixel ruler, and I'll just try to like recreate sites in my sketchbook and then take note of the dimensions and try to find the relationships. Like, oh fuck, this is 2 times as much as this other thing was. Or, oh, this little motif is being repeated all over the place. Never really picked up on that. And you learn a lot about good design that way. But yes, so we have links down here in the bottom. And think about a time you've gone to a site and scrolled immediately to the bottom. When did you do that?
I want to find something specific.
When you want to find something specific. What else? Like what kind of specific thing might you want to find?
Contact information.
Cool. Right there.
Social media.
FAQ a lot of the time too.
Absolutely. Warranty. Careers.
Careers.
Like, we just expect that kind of stuff to be down there. So, it's a little bit fucking rude if you don't put it down there. Yeah, social links. We have an expectation that that's where those things are going to be, and so that's immediately where we look, so we should match the user's expectation and put them there. Along with typography, probably the next biggest giveaway that like somebody did not put any effort into the design for it. I don't know if any of you picked up on this. What about the text alignment? Anybody pick up on that? Yeah, we have this nice sharp line there. How much stuff is centered on this?
Only the important stuff.
Only the important stuff. These are all left aligned. That's left aligned. That's right aligned. This is centered. Left, 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 left all the way down, left all the way down, left all the way down. Weird. So how come when I see like student design work, I exclusively just see shit centered all over the fucking place? So like, this is centered. Basically nothing else is. There is something really elegant about tight edges on this. Your eye tracks it so much easier. You start super centering shit all over the place, it gets really hard to go from line to line because they start in different places. The reason left alignment is so common in like left to right languages is like that's where your eye expects, there's that word again, that's where your eye expects something to be. And so you get to the end of the line and your eye automatically thinks it's calibrated. Oh, wait a minute, no, it's over here now. And this next one's over here, and this one's over here. Suck, looks sloppy. And then you might be thinking, well, Kyle, if that's the case, why wouldn't we justify all the text? Justifying is where we have a sharp left edge and a sharp right edge, and we play with the spacing between the words and the letters to keep that. It's even worse. Like, 2 things. It like makes all the distance between the letters unpredictable, which is like not good for readability. And it also has a tendency to create these little, they're called rivers, that just go through all of the little compromises you made, and they just go right down through. It's horrific. But like, when in doubt, left align. It almost always looks better. Because you can imagine this being centered here, and centered here, and centered here, and looking way sloppier as a result. Give it a very different feel. Probably make it feel like a wedding invitation, which there's a saying in the design community that like that's the only time you should use centered text in a wedding invitation. Oh, and like, this is a little out of scope for this chat. Look at the really nice balance between those 2. That's nice.
Every time you scroll down the section, it seems like it's a whole
yeah.
the whole picture in itself.
Well, so that animation, if you look at the distance between those, how it changes when I scroll. It's not quite parallax. It's in the family of parallax. But yeah, that's really nice. And what that does is it creates energy. it makes it feel like the site is more alive than it really is. It's a similar thing that's happening here when you scroll over this. The most impressive thing they do about this, see how it shrinks when you stop? That has a ton of motion to it. And I was trying to figure out what kind of thing they're trying to mimic with this. Because like these kinds of effects very quickly fall into the world of what we call visual sugar. Visual sugar is shit that's visually very impressive and serves absolutely no design function. And like that's another like amateur hour shit in design, is you see something that's like super impressive and it's pointless. Like, no, don't visualize sugar. It's shit like this. Like, whoa, what brilliant design. Like, what fucking information are you supposed to pull out of that? It's just cool looking. It doesn't tell you anything. So I think one of the things that's happening there is it's supposed to look like a watch hand. And it does, like, as you inevitably hit over that, it's almost impossible to not make the watch jump out as you do it. That's pretty cool. Yeah. This? Oh, yeah. That iconography is kind of interesting. I like it. Oh, is that the actual time too? That would be badass. No, it's not. No, it's not that either because it's 07 right now. But that's cool. So I'll point this out too. This is thing number 3 that people do to ruin their designs when they're starting out. Is how many boxes with borders do you see on this page? Literally 0. Now, some things do have boxes, but they're these washed out things. Your eye creates the border. You don't need to also put this thick black stroke around it that I see in like every single student project. Even this input box. We want to know where to click. That's enough. We don't even need the rest of the lines around that to see that. And so like in the design world, you say that like every time you put like a stroke around something like that, it's like insulting the user because you're like, hey, in case you were like too stupid to tell, this is a box. Or like putting a box around this. I was like, well, no, you established that these things belong together with how you place them relative to each other. Like, it's like explaining a joke. You're like, these kind of go together if you didn't pick up on that. I'll put a little box around these, I'll put a bigger box around this. It's like, yeah, got it. Those go together. But like part of the other side of that is that you can almost picture this imaginary rectangle that goes around that. That takes talent. That's hard to do. But that's the thing you're going for, is like a really like, don't oversell the grouping on stuff.
Well, it's just so solid how that left line on the like that background works with the text.
Yeah, it's probably the function that this is serving, is like letting your eye do the rest of this work to get down here. And like explaining a joke is a really good example too, because you need to give them a hint of where this is going, but they have to, their eye and brain have to do the rest of the work. And they will. Like this is evolutionarily wired into us. So like, get it started, but always like let the user do some of the work themselves. That's what makes it meaningful. Cool. So we've talked about typography, color, and layout. And our goal was to list the qualities of a well-designed website. These can be things that you definitely want to do on your stuff. This can be stuff that you never again want to do on your stuff. But I want to take a couple minutes. I want everybody to come up with this list of qualities of a well-designed site. Go. Let's take another minute. Okay, so I want to share in small groups a little bit. Let's do 2, 3, 2. All right, share your list. Totally. So you want to do this sketch, but if it's a brand new pattern, this is a new designer. Nobody else has done it before. Probably not for one. Cracking a new pattern. Right. Exactly. Another 10 seconds?
Oh, yeah, no, I made my website.
All right, back together with me. So, I heard so many good things coming out of that. So let's reflect a little bit. How have we changed in the last hour and 15 minutes? What are some things we're taking out of this? Please don't put things in boxes. No boxes. Centering. Just be careful with that shit, man. What else are we taking out of this? Fonts matter. And they're free. It's so easy. Yeah. White space. Great great trick I learned with white space recently. It's super true. Is start with way more than you need and then get smaller rather than going the other way. Because what happens when you do it with like no white space and you start adding it is you stop when it stops actively looking bad, not when it looks good. You do it the other way, it ends up with much better results. And like one that like I'm doing on mine right now, I just noticed this recently, is way too little. Way too little. And what not enough white space does is it makes things feel tense. That's a tool in the toolbox, probably not what I was going for here. So, I centered the box. That's okay. I didn't center the typography. Cool. What are some other things you're taking away from this? Meet expectations. Yes. Predictable. Some of this stuff bridges between visual design, which is what we've been talking about here, and user experience. Predictable interfaces, things that like think in terms of like actions that you want to take. What is the process for adding a watch to a thing and checking out? That flow is user experience. Or as I said on a panel sometime this year, user experience is the scale between like user delight and rage. Or like every time you've grabbed your phone, you're like, holy shit, that worked. Okay, that's great UX versus bad UX. And if you want to find out more about that, I know a handsome, brilliant guy who has hosted 147, episodes of a user experience podcast. 7 best friends decide to become equal partners in an agency.
Ooh, that's a terrible idea.
Yeah.
It was the worst fucking idea possible. Or...
Yeah.
I met this guy in person. He's a dickbag.
Oh, he is like
He knows
the
nothing.
cockiest fucking
He's a dribble
asshole.
designer.
He's a
Dribble designer.
He's a dribble designer.
Or... This is my podcast.
The thing is, like,
Seriously,
I've
dude?
missed notifications from like my manager and shit.
No.
And I'm like, I'm sorry, team sucks. Hashtag oops.
Like total clutter.
Hashtag oops. I've like missed notifications from my... We're talking about how much Teams sucks. Teams is Microsoft's alternative to Slack. And it's like, oh, Teams is the worst. I've missed notifications from my manager. I have to be like, oh, sorry, I didn't get that message. Hashtag oops. Cool. So, anything else we're taking away from this? Even just like more broadly about design and what it is and how it's very much our job and that kind of stuff.
Don't overload with images.
Don't overload with images.
Low visual complexity.
Yeah, low visual complexity. I love it.
Creating hierarchies without just making font bigger.
We have so many different things we can use to create hierarchy. Size is like the coarsest one that we have. But color, we call value, which is like how dark or light something is. Even placement. Stuff that's in the upper left is naturally more important than something that's in the lower right. So our placement on those things can also create hierarchy. Yeah?
So I have a question. On your site, you have like the stripes, kind of like a
Mhm.
wallpaper.
Yeah.
Is that, like, is that color, does that count as part of your like color?
Yes, that is my one color.
Okay.
And pro tip, the reason that I did it is like you load this site and you go, holy crap, there's a video playing in the background and it loaded so quickly. It's because the quality of the video is very low. But with these like kind of fake scan lines in there, you don't notice it nearly as much. Also, the other thing that it does is it creates like a color wash for this to jump out on a lot clearer. It's really difficult to get text to jump out on like an image background without either super desaturating the image or doing a color wash on it. That was from my, it was called Progressive Web Apps Are the Future. As a talk I gave at TechCrunch Disrupt. My wife said that I had very good TED Talk hands. You can make a good performant hybrid app. Dev cost, super high on native because you need platform spec. Some people have this, some people have this. App stores take some of the friction out of the install process. They really manage it in the background, but none of that has really moved at all. So the web is what gets us the, hey, I want this thing and now I have it. I don't have to take other. Was it?
Have you done it TED Talk?
No.
You actually like the meetings?
All right, cool. Silly. Cool. Anything else we should talk about? Questions you have? Thank you very much. That was fun.
Thank you.
You're welcome.